Hi there, guys. It's late at night for me. I couldn't get to sleep, so I figured I would do some grading and finish Bud, Not Buddy. We are in what's called the Afterword, and these are Christopher Paul Curtis's thoughts that he thought he should share with you about his inspiration for writing the book, to give you a couple more details. Except this is actually factual information. What I would like you to do after this is go on your assignment and type in 3 interesting things in the little message box. Type in 3 things you found interesting in the afterword. Okay, here we go. It is on page 237. Although Bud, Not Buddy is fictional, many of the situations Bud encounters are based on events that occurred in the 1930s. During a time known as the Great Depression. And although the characters in Bud Not Buddy are fictional as well, some of them too are based on real people. One of the most enjoyable parts of writing is that an author can combine his or her imagination with the traits of real people to build new characters. That is what I did to create the characters of Lefty Lewis and Herman E. Calloway, both of whom are based loosely on my grandfathers. My mother's father, Earl Lefty Lewis, was one of the 6 or 7 redcaps who worked at the train station in Grand Rapids, Michigan during much of the Depression. The jobs of Pullman porter and redcap were among the few open to African American men at that time and carried a certain prestige in the black community. Nonetheless, they were extremely difficult jobs, often marked by 80-hour work weeks, low salary, and virtually no job security. These men could be fired for simply not looking happy enough. Grandpa Lewis did exceptionally well during the Depression, supporting his family on the tips he received as a redcap. My mother remembers that my grandmother used to have to sew reinforced linings into the pockets of all of Grandpa's pants because the weight of the pennies, nickels, dimes, and occasional quarters that he was given as tips would eventually rip the seams out. She also remembers the leathery texture Grandpa's hands took on from carrying so much baggage at the station. As the Depression deepened, the Grand Rapids train station cut back to 2 redcaps, and Grandpa was let go. He briefly opened a small restaurant and finally became the first African American cab driver in Grand Rapids, a job he held until his retirement in 1972 at 74 years old. What? Earl Lefty Lewis also pitched for many years in the minors of the Negro baseball leagues. His fondest memory of that time was pitching twice against Satchel Paige. As he did with most opposing pitchers, Satch hung Grandpa with 2 losses. That means Satchel hit every ball and Grandpa lost both of those games. My father's father, Herman E. Curtis, was indeed a big band leader for most of his adult life. He headed many different musical groups, my favorite being Herman E. Curtis and the Dusky Devastators of the Depression! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. A name that by itself deserves all 6 of those exclamation points. Grandpa attended the Indiana Conservatory of Music and was a classically trained violinist. He also played the bass fiddle, the accordion, and the piano. Entertainment was an important part of life during the Depression, for people wanted to forget their troubles by going to the movies, sitting around the radio, and listening and dancing to live music. Grandpa and his bands were well known throughout Michigan during this time. Being an orchestra leader was Grandpa Curtis's night job. By day, he wore many different hats, among them those of a chauffeur, boat captain, and truck painter. He owned several businesses in Grand Rapids and Wyoming, Michigan, at a time when laws prohibited African Americans from renting or holding title to land in these two cities. Grandpa did this by having a white friend put his name on all the records. Ooh, that's where he got the idea for Dirty Deed, the piano player, the white piano player. Dirty Deed, he got his name Deed because he had to write his name on the deed, aka contract, so that he could actually own that place. So he put a white person's name on it, but the white person didn't really own it. The flexibility, people, skills, hustle, and willingness to work around unfair laws and situations that both of my grandfathers used allowed them to keep their families together during one of America's bleakest periods, a time that was especially hard on African Americans. Both of these men were fortunate and skilled enough to avoid the brunt of the Great Depression. And so I know it's hard to see in this picture. There's Herman E. Curtis with the Dusky Devastators, and there is Lefty Lewis, his mother's father, who was a red cap for the trains and then eventually drove a cab until he was what, 74 years old? But he was also in the minor leagues, minor Negro leagues, which is kind of cool. The lives of Earl Lefty Lewis and Herman E. Curtis and the situations described in Bud Not Buddy are the exception, for the great majority of people suffered horribly during the period between 1929, that was the beginning of the Great Depression, and 1941, which was the start of World War II, basically. Parents often could not feed their children, so countless thousands of young people, some as young as 8 years old, were abandoned or had to set out on their own in search of a meal or a warm place to sleep. These children survived the brutal life on the road by riding the rails, picking fruit, doing odd jobs, begging, stealing, or whatever was necessary to get food. Much of what I discovered about the Depression I learned through research and books, which is a shame. I didn't take advantage of the family history that surrounded me for many years. I'm afraid that when I was younger, and my grandparents and parents would start to talk about their lives during the Depression, my eyes would glaze over and I'd think, oh no, not those boring tall tales again. And I'd find the most convenient excuse I could get to get away from them. Now I feel a great sorrow, a real sorrow when I think of all the knowledge, wisdom, and stories that have been forever lost with the deaths of my grandparents. Be smarter than I was. Go talk to Grandma and Grandpa, Mom and Dad, and other relatives and friends. Discover and remember what they have to say about what they learned growing up. By keeping their stories alive, you make them and yourself immortal. All right, that is the end of Bud Not Buddy. Gee, I wonder if you guys are thinking, what are we going to do next? I don't know yet. Anyway, go into your assignment box for the afterword. In the message box of that assignment, type in 3 interesting things you thought about in the afterword. All right, see you guys later. Bye.